I will try to wrap this up. When I decided to do this, I just started on it, and I did not know what shape it was going to be by the time it was finished. So I just sort of grew. But anyway, this is what it's become. I'll just revise this. The first video identifies the who, what, when and where, and why. Just to put it all into perspective. The second one is all about what kind of responses can be expected and what mainstream treatments you can expect. This all comes from this. The second one, and then I forget what order. I think we're down to what sort of things you can apply that'll have an effect that can benefit you. And I suppose this partly came from, you can think of this as coming from the result of, I haven't got it on here, that risk assessment exercise I did. Came to two conclusions, and one of them is that you're going to be left to your own devices. You're going to have to find your own PPE, and that is self-help. And one of the sort of things that can help is over here. Modern psychology, which is mainstream, can help. That's what you'll find these, I don't know, what are they, these specialists that are going to be flown out to hotspots. They'll be working from this. If you wonder what that is, that's a Greek letter psi, or psi, short for psych or psychology. Just a little abbreviation in case you're curious why I put that there. I didn't have enough, we're back on the main board, and I didn't have enough space to expand all these, and so there's just little notes, little headings. So if you remember, this was one of the little diagrams that shows how only part of our mentality is conscious. There's a whole lot that's unconscious, and things can go wrong there. And so, if you can go digging, you can correct some of these things. And that, I've noted, is an internal process. You might have heard me saying that, look, in my opinion, there are two things you need. Any internal process will assist you to grow your self-assurance, and with that, any centering process will help you be immune to being intimidated. Now, psychology, and then I go off the mainstream here. These are the other self-help alternatives that I have found useful. There could be any number of others out there, so go looking, see what suits you. And so I've done videos on, I put 5-hydroxytryptophan there, which is an alternative to, if you want to get off your prescription medication, if you're being treated for anxious depression, you can resort to that with some caution. And the triple Energizer Meridian, I've talked about. I clumped those together because they're both short, and I'll put them both in one video, but they don't really relate to each other very much. And then other things that I've resorted to myself, yoga, which helps with your internal processes. I realised when I looked at these are all foreign. That's European. These are foreign. Triple Energizer Meridian, that's from China. Yoga is from India. These two here, Reiki, Aikido, the key in each of those refers to the same thing. I didn't know why I put that up, but I ended up making a story out of it because it's important to my own. This one here, Aikido, the more I think about it, the more I reckon that's the one, you know, if I had, I don't like saying if I had my time over again. If I had my time over again, I'd start on that as early as possible. Preschool. Remember this one? Yes. Not just for school students, for teachers as well. I'm rambling on, so that's pretty much the review in order of the videos I've produced. There are a number of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at least. I thought, I can talk about this in about an hour. 1 hour grew into 2, grew into all these. Okay. I pulled this out to remind me to talk about iodine. I couldn't think where to put it. It didn't belong with anything else. Look, especially in early childhood, iodine helps develop the brain. Don't ask me how. But it's useful enough if you are, as a family, you're using iodized salt on your food. I pulled this out. A Centrum tablet says iodine, 150 micrograms as potassium iodide, so must be considered to be somewhat important. We know how it is important because, I remember there are various parts of the world, and locally Tasmania is one that's notoriously low in availability of natural iodine, and what you find is after a few generations of this, it tends to degenerate through the generations, and after a few generations, children grow up stunted and so mentally retarded they're barely better than vegetables. No, it's quite nasty. So you need your iodine supplement if you're not getting it from your food. What I wanted to talk about this was one of the few things that my mother grudgingly allowed our father to do was he had a little bottle of Lujol's solution, which is iodine dissolved in potassium iodide, and we had 1 drop of that in a glass of water once a week. I could go off and tell another story, but that's beside the point. He must have somehow realised that this was important. And I've been talking about brain development, and I speculate that these that I've been talking about, bullies, are in this range of IQ 80 to 95, if they'd been given a bit of iodine in their younger days, just might have bumped them up a little more so that the top ones could have escaped this range. If you give it to everybody, some of these here might end up in that range, which will tend to... but statistically, more will be promoted there than will be promoted here. It'll be beneficial overall. Iodine. Right. Now, I mentioned the risk assessment before. that if you see, I think it was at somewhere in the early stages here, I sort of worked through one of those, and it fell down to PPE, personal protective equipment, self-help being about the only thing we really have available to us. Look, by the time I'd finished high school, I was convinced grade 9B boys should not be in an academic setting. They are much too disruptive. They do too much damage. And I've maintained that conviction all my life, and I've only become more and more convinced of it. So what I would do, and this results from the risk assessment, separate, in the industrial setting, you separate the human from the dangerous machinery or whatever it is. And so I'm a big fan of this separation. So I would advocate, is this going to show up here, that separate schools be built. Don't cram them all into the one where they can hack away at each other. I'd put the academics in one building, one side of town, and most of the girls who don't take academic subjects, they do commercial. Basically, I'm going back when I was at school, I was at 50 odd years ago. This is what we had. They traditionally learnt typing and stuff like that, typing, bookkeeping. And another one for I think they were called manual arts, your industrials. So the girls that weren't academics did commercial, and the boys who weren't academics did manual arts. And they're the ones who help build houses and repair cars and stuff like that. These were designed for, these were supposed to become secretaries and accountants and things like that. So, different locations in town. Somehow you've got to stop them from ambushing each other on the way home. This isn't going to work. This isn't going to be done anyway. But just in my mind, I think I'd prefer to do this. But instinct isn't going to approve, because how are the grade 10 boys going to pair off with the grade 9 girls if they're separated from each other? I can imagine this being proposed, and the protesters will cram the streets with their placards saying, "This is segregation, that's apartheid," and worse things than that I can't say here without risking being charged with hate speech or something. So, I imagine if our little man who'd parachuted in from Mars was assigned to do the risk assessment, would stumble away shaking his head saying, "What is it with these humans? They just won't do anything that makes sense." But anyway, there we have it. Why I would do that, I wouldn't do it. You might only have to do that up to grade 10 by the time you get up to senior years. You see, you do this while they still don't have their civilising qualities developed yet. Once they start to develop those, you can start to let them interact a bit less destructively. I didn't quite know what to include here. I think I could ramble for hours. I've got more stuff that I've noted down here and there, and I thought of while I was drifting off to sleep. But it's all peripheral, so I don't want to take up too much time. I go too far off track. I've written culture here, and this is... No, I haven't got it on here, but I mentioned about how being different can make you a target. And what I would like to say to people who are suffering that is, don't bother trying to change yourself to fit in, because you never will. Play to your strengths. If you have cultural strengths that you can resort to give you more resilience, stay with it. Because, you know, I have an image in my mind. Look, you can be a fairly hefty Maori boy who's useful on the football field, but he'll still suffer intimidation and sledging and all that on the field. So that's never going to change. It's deeply entrenched. So I'd say play to your strengths. You may find, if you go back and ask your grandparents, you know, if you're one of these who's not, who hasn't been born in Australia for generations, ask your grandparents about the culture that they came from, and they may tell you how they resolve differences within their community and things like that. Systems that they had to build their own self-assurance and so on. So don't go falling over yourself to try to fit in, is my suggestion. I'm rambling. I made a tiny note here. This lot here that we now train to build houses and repair cars. In tribal societies, I imagine these would have been sent to be trained as warriors, and they'd go out around the borders to defend the homeland against the warriors of other tribes. That was their assignment. But now we don't do that so much. You know, our military's been shrunk and all this. And so, those used to have a well-defined, what would you call it? Pathway. What is it? Occupational pathway, we'd call it. But we don't. Well, you know, these days we play football. Your football team is drawn from a relatively small area. You know, from one rural town or from one suburb in the city or a small cluster of suburbs. You know, and this is us and that's them. You know, so we take it out on the football field. Right, I'm sure I've forgotten a few things. Yesterday I thought I'd finish this, but as usually happens, I looked up at the board and realised I hadn't mentioned this or this. I had an uneasy feeling I needed to try to explain centering some more. And then something else came up. And of course I was trying to get to sleep last night and that was churning up. I wish I could have recorded that then. It was all clear to me then. I've got to try to remember it now. So in no particular order. Here, what I should have said, look, when instinct is applying this test to you to check whether you're suitable breeding material, it's only checking whether you are physically and emotionally robust enough. Instinct has no conception of intelligence. See, this is what the natural world runs on. Animals run on this. A human is supposed to be an intelligence. You see, if you go on to have a family, basically, oh, what am I trying to say? Look, animals do this all the time. Animals don't have any intelligence. An animal is not an intelligence. They act on instinct. So even an animal can breed. They do it all the time. But a human, trying to live our human lives, if you have a family, things keep happening which require you to think. I know, I can hear a vast majority of people out there going, no, but all you have to do is follow instinct, you'll have all the end. No, you won't. You'll attempt to follow instinct and you'll get into conflicts and someone will win and someone else won't. And, so if all you're doing is following instinct, you'd have been better off born as a monkey. Intelligence. Yeah. Instinct does not test for intelligence. Let me see. That's not as clear to me as when I was thinking about it before. But anyway, let's hope. What's the next thing over here? I wrote down that ordinary people tend to make it worse. If you have flipped into depression, you need someone who really understands. I mentioned here previously, I have an uncle who introduced me to some elementary psychology, and that was useful. While I'm on that, one of the things that ordinary people do, and this has actually happened to me, a nice bloke, he said to me, oh, look, everybody gets a bit unhappy at times. It's all in your mind. And he walked away. The implication being if you ignore it, it can't affect you. Well, sorry, that's not how it works. This adverse conditioning has sunk deep into your unconscious mind and it's now controlling your behaviour and your mood, particularly your mood. Refusing to give it any thought won't help. It's running on automatic now. Keeps running your life. So I think these days, more new age sort of people particularly say that ignoring it, they call denial. It's not a good thing. It's not effective. Doesn't help at all. So that's one way that ordinary people, even with the best of intentions, go wrong. I've got to remember, I'll mention this now. You either need someone who understands properly. Well, you need someone who understands properly. The other ones who understand properly are people like professional counsellors. And so in my experience, yes, my uncle helped me. Yes, my doctor, my general practitioner helped me. He sort of pointed out what was wrong. And the counsellor that I went to helped me. But ordinary people, I'm afraid, as well-meaning as you all are, tend to make it go from bad to worse if someone has flipped. So most of them are forgettable. There are any number of people, well-meaning people, who've taken it upon themselves to fix me up and have only made it worse. I thought of a couple of examples, but here's one. Suppose you've got a boy who's a bit gloomy and he has actually flipped. And you say, oh, we know what'll help. This will pull him out of it. We'll throw him a surprise birthday party and invite all his friends. So, oh dear, on the day, you fling open the door and he comes. And he's immediately shocked everybody else there's happy and all this, and he's not. So the sight of all this suddenly fills him with anxiety, and he knows what he has to do is smile and say, "Oh, thank you," when really all he wants to do is disappear down a crack in the floor. This is what it's like for someone who has flipped. And then afterwards you say to him, "But why aren't you happy? We went to all this trouble for you." And then it sort of goes downhill from there. You've got to be happy. You've got to be confident. As though you can just switch these things on and off, or buy them from a shelf at the supermarket or something. No, they're not. Being happy, being confident are only indicators. They're not deep enough to... They're not causes. They're just indicators. That's not deep enough. And so, you know, people get exasperated with you. Then they just say, "Well, you just got to pull your socks up, mister." They don't realise you're already exhausted from trying to pull your socks up. It's affecting us. You're making us. Yeah, you've seen that. And that, yeah, you can see how that'll help, doesn't it? You're to blame for their mood now. So I don't know whether I've gone on enough to illustrate that. But, you know, with the best intentions in the world, unless you really do understand, tread carefully. You're going to have to get them to something like this to really help pull them out of it once they're already down with depression. I keep talking about anxious depression because that's my experience. Could be any number of possibilities, and you're not going to be able to identify it or know what to do about it until you get them to a professional. I don't like saying, but I don't know what any example. Oh, there are other examples, but anyway. There's that and that. The next one here, I had an uneasy feeling I had not explained well enough about centering, and I still can't. Your question would be, well, how do you get centered? And I pulled it. Ideally, I really should read all these Aikido books again. I had a quick look in there this morning, and what I've been saying is correct enough, but as you can see, it doesn't go far enough. But for example, before they actually do any practice, they do a series of, in sporting terms, we would call warm-up exercises, but they're a bit more specialised than that. Centering, right. This will help get your ki flowing, and it will also help get you centered. I just thought I might illustrate something a bit more about centering. Right. If you want to get somewhere, you'll be off centre forwards. Or if you have to drive yourself to get somewhere, you might be off centre forwards. If you're trying to walk in through the school gate filled with apprehension, you might be leaning back and saying, "Oh, I know what's going to happen today again." And you see you're tilted backwards. And because you're off your centre, the bullies have got you right where they want you. I realised, this morning, the day before, I started this trying to explain about bullying, and I identified all this, and that's why it's taken up so much of the board. To really be comprehensive about this, I should have a big area of the board over here, that explains what's going on in people who are susceptible to being bullied. And I'm afraid I've only just thought of that, and I haven't really thought of what the details are going to be. But, you know, when I asked Copilot AI to explain this and this, come back with a great big list here. There was also a big list here, and I was sort of running out of space. So there's that. And then being deposed from your centre was something it did not come back with. Just in the same way as AI did not come back with all this, the instinct and the civilising, you know, the development of the human brain and the civilising qualities and the intelligence range, things like that. I added all that. It did not come back with it. So AI came back with a big long list, something like that, and I wrote that there. The thing, in my mind, the thing that disposes you most to being a victim is being deposed from your centre. And I'm afraid, oh look, I don't know how. Even an expert could probably not explain that in a 1 hour video. And it's something that Westerners in particular are not really familiar with. So I don't know how to approach that. Centering, warm-up exercises, where you hold your attention, you know, in your, basically where your centre of mass is. I could go on and on and on, and still all I'm doing is rambling around and around the outsides of it. I don't know how to really get to the centre of it to give you something useful. I'm just making you aware of it. Centre. Look, something else got dumped in front of me in the last few days. I'm sort of scrolling through Facebook posts and dear me, where can I start? Me trying to explain Christianity to Christians, it's a bit, how do you do this? But, you know, I can see myself as an outsider, I'm looking in from the outside. And these were about, you know, I think a lot of this is made up, but anyway, the story was presented as someone who's been a sort of an educator in the Christian realm for decades, hasn't thought about this, and his Sunday school students are sitting here. But then, of course, some of them are running into difficulties like this, and they're starting to doubt themselves. This is how the story goes, and they're saying, why am I having all this trouble? Is my faith not strong enough? Have I sinned? Is God punishing me? And he points out it's none of those things. And what they're doing is selling something. He and his colleagues have developed a kit of sayings, verses from the Bible that show you that it's not how you think. And I gather one of the things that it's pointing out is that the Bible's not all sweetness and light. Particularly in the Old Testament, there's heaps of gruesome stuff in there. I should point out, before I forget, one of the sayings points to your misery is being observed. You haven't been deserted. We know about what's happening. I note that it does not say we are going to intervene on your behalf. It just says we know about it. That's all. So you haven't been deserted. And what came to mind for me, although they didn't mention it, is the Old Testament book of, it's spelt J-O-B. Australians will say Job. I've heard it pronounced Job. I think the Hebrew pronunciation would be Yov. It's quite a lengthy book. If more is better. Just my oversimplified description of what's going on in there. The Lord and Satan are having a bit of a one-upmanship game. And the Lord says, behold, my servant, Yov. He is 100% faithful to me. And Satan says, I bet I could break him. And so, go for it. And poor old Yov, he used to be prosperous and all this. And so he loses everything. And to cut a very long story short, he's afflicted with all sorts of dreadful ailments. Satan appears to him and says, curse God and worship me, and I'll erase all these afflictions off you. And Yov says, I won't do that. And this goes on and on and on, and in the end he passes the test, is the moral of the story. But as you can see from the story is that dreadful things can be happening to you, and there's a purpose behind it. Just because you have faith and you haven't sinned doesn't mean that dreadful things aren't going to happen to you. So yeah, I think that's it. I don't know, I like to wrap things up, but I don't know how I can. I think you get the point. So yeah, if your technique is to pray and have faith, and it's working, keep doing it. If you're new age and you go around with a crystal in your pocket and you're repeating affirmations or something like that, and it's working, keep doing it. When things appear to fail, you're going to want an explanation. And it's never that simple. Did I mention, I think I did, yeah, to really make this all balanced, I should have something the size of this over here. And I can't even think how to start on it yet. I don't know if I ever will. So what I've got to do is sit down and do some editing and try to insert this into what I did yesterday. What I wanted to finish with. This little spot here, I might try to focus in on a bit. This was one of my realizations that I came to after I'd already started. And I was sort of moaning about how the people who come in here will come in with their woke idealism and say, oh, now you have to be tolerant and inclusive and all that. And somehow I thought to write intolerance and rejection there, and it flashed out at me that that is the biggest realisation for me of all of this. You see, bullies are like the furniture. They've always been there, we don't notice them anymore. They've always done this. This is their mode of operation. They practice tolerance. Correction, they practice intolerance and rejection. But because they've always been doing that, we don't notice. So, when these come out, I would say, I don't know what sort of people they're going to be. But if they're woke, let them bring their woke idealism and their big heaps of documentation and their quality assured procedures and see if they can apply them to these. That's where it is needed. If they are capable of correcting the behaviour of all these, the whole problem disappears, and I'll make a deal with them. If they can achieve that, I'll start listening to them. Got a deal? Go to it.